Caloroga Shark Media.
Hello, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. SNL did their annual year-end joke swaps between Jost and Che. The one I liked the best was written by Michael Che, voiced by Colin Jost, who said ChatGPT has released a new voice assistant feature inspired by Scarlett Johansson's AI character in Her, which I've never bothered to watch because without that body, what's the point of listening? That's a good joke. In case you don't get the joke, Colin Jost is married to Scarlett Johansson. That's why it's funny. Jerry Seinfeld insists on being in this podcast every single day. What happened now, Johnny Mac? Jerry's there in Virginia. He's just trying to do his little comedy show. Here's some alliteration. A pro-Palestinian protester proceeded to stand up and shout insults towards Jerry Seinfeld, calling him a genocide supporter. The protester yelled, "Save the children of Gaza, no more American tax dollars for genocide." Audience members began quickly booing the heckler and demanded that he shut up and get out. The protester kept shouting to the audience, "You should be ashamed of yourself. You should all be ashamed of yourselves." According to TMZ, Jerry said, "This is fun. I like this. I think your message is really resonating with the crowd. People seem to be on your side." Wow. The protester responded, "How dare you support a genocide?" According to the version I'm seeing, Jerry supposedly said, "I like it when the Jew haters spice up the show." According to TMZ, additional videos from the night showed an audience member starting a fight with the protester, eventually grabbing the protester in a headlock. Security came and escorted the protester out of the room. The crowd chanted, "Jerry, Jerry, Jerry." TMZ says there were about 8 demonstrators throughout the show who were all escorted out by security. Wow. Eyewitnesses say Jerry told his audience not to boo and supported their right to protest. Rachel Feinstein's new special is out on Netflix today. It is called Big Guy. In Big Guy, Rachel describes her life as the wife of a firefighter, a mother, and a stand-up comic. In the words of her 3-year-old daughter, "My daddy's a hero and my mommy's sarcastic." Today's one of those days where we see if Johnny Mac can make an episode out of nothing. I just played my 2 cards. Everything else is me shucking and jiving. A Vulture had somebody at Anthony Jeselnik's show at the Netflix festival. John, wasn't that 2 weeks ago? It was. But according to Vulture, Anthony opened his show talking about how an audience member had thought a joke he told a week earlier was problematic. Jeselnik said he had closed his show with that joke, so he vowed to stop closing with it. Instead, he decided to open with it. During his set, he joked about politics, redecorating his place, telling jokes on the South, porn addiction, having a day job 15 years ago, and the time that Kanye West attended one of his shows. All right, let me read verbatim here. Speaking of being canceled, Jeselnik takes a long pause at one point, ramping up to talk about the subject. He says, and let me see if I can recreate it here, "I'm against cancel culture." That's my impression of a crappy comic trying to get on Rogan. He closed with a story about Norm Macdonald. When Jeselnik was asked to host Last Comic Standing, he initially said no. When they told him Norm was a judge, he said yes. For the first few episodes, they didn't get along. Then they went on Larry King, and Norm suggested that they start a bitter feud just for fun on the show. So Nick goes out and talks about how much he doesn't like Norm. Then it was Norm's turn. When asked about Jeselnik, Norm said, "Larry, he's one of the greats." A prank on the audience, and Larry King was turned on Jeselnik. Vulture says Jeselnik's set was a tight 48 minutes. Here's an article that Scott Beckett's going to like. It is entitled, 5 Surprise Comedians Joe Coy Could Bring to His Portland, Maine Show. Now, you know Joe Coy, right? He's the guy that hosted the Golden Globes, and he got in a little controversy with Taylor Swift. He told this horrible, mean joke, like, I come here, I just want to, brighten up your day. I'm not looking to be mean, but just, not everybody knows who Joe Coy is, and I want you to understand who this guy is. He's just a vicious comedian that goes after, Taylor Swift. What's not to like about Taylor Swift? She's out there singing her songs, and then this guy has to go and say this.
The big difference between the Golden Globes and the NFL, on the Golden Globes, we have fewer camera shots of Taylor Swift.
I mean, brutal, right? I don't blame Taylor for sitting there and not laughing at that joke and just making a mean face and basically wrecking Joe Coy's career. I mean, that was just uncalled for. Anyway, WJBQ.com. Scott, I told you I'm trying to make a show out of nothing today. Go with the bit. Relax. They ask 5 surprise comedians Joe Coy could bring to his Portland, Maine show. I love the word could. I could have Jerry Seinfeld co-hosting this podcast tomorrow. You never know. You'll have to download it to find out. Is it statistically likely? No, but it could happen. All right, the first person that Joe Coy might possibly perhaps bring to the Cross Insurance Arena on November 14th, they suggest Chelsea Handler. Sure. Joe Coy's ex-girlfriend is just going to guest at his show in Maine. Seems likely. Next up, Adam Sandler. Sure, Adam Sandler is just going to pop into Joe Coy's show in Maine in November because he's promoting Happy Gilmore 2. And what other way could Adam Sandler get anyone to talk about him than just doing a cameo at Joe Coy's show in Maine? What is this article? Number 3, who could show up at Joe Coy's show? Nikki Glazer. Q97.9 Hit Music tells us there may not be a comedian that is trending more right now than Nikki Glazer. Nikki could ride the wave and be a huge surprise for the Cross Insurance Arena crowd. Yeah, I mean, career-wise, that makes sense, right? She's riding high. It's May 21st. Sit tight for 4 or 5 months. Show up in Maine in November. Do a cameo at a Joe Coy concert. I'll recap it. I'll do the Taylor Swift bit. Nikki Glazer gets some press. That makes a ton of sense. Next up, Bob Marley. This almost makes sense. Bob Marley, known as the comedian from Maine. He plays in Maine a lot, so sure, that might make sense. Next up, Rob Gronkowski. Q97.9 Hit Music writes, this one is way out of left field. You think? Actually, you should have made a football pun there, no? Gronk isn't a comedian, but he shocked a lot of people with how funny he can be during the roast of Tom Brady. Wouldn't it be great if he was a surprise guest in Portland for Joe's show? I mean, yeah, sure. Great suggestions there. Appreciate that one. Killed 2 minutes on a slow news day. Love you. Harry Shearer spoke to exclaim.ca about The Simpsons, and he says, The Simpsons is not going woke. Relax. Folks say the show has become woke in recent years, and one of my characters has been affected. I voiced the black physician Dr. Hibbert, who I based on Bill Cosby. Back then, he was known as the whitest black man on television. Then a couple years ago, I received an email saying they'd employed a black actor who then copied my voice. The result is a black man imitating a white man, imitating the whitest black man on TV. I haven't seen an episode of The Simpsons in a minute, and I like The Simpsons a lot. It's just, I fell out of the habit when they started being inconsistent with when it aired after football. Like, it aired after football, but I'd try and tape it, and I wound up with a lot of incomplete episodes, and it just broke the habit. You can't break the habit with stuff. You gotta be there. Like, later this year, I'm taking a major trip. I may have to pre-tape a lot of episodes, but I'm going to do it. You're going to get an episode in the feed every day. Can't break the habit with the listeners. Jimmy Kimmel is going to host a fundraiser for President Biden on June 15th in Los Angeles. No venue yet, but George Clooney and Julia Roberts will be there. Tickets start at $250 a piece and go up to $500,000. And in case we couldn't tell which way Kimmel leaned in this particular election, I think he's made it clear. The gods of slow news day have hooked me up. Vulture wrote an article, 25 essential Bob's Burgers episodes. Thank you, Vulture, so much for this. I need this today. Vulture tells us it's been updated with more episodes ahead of the Bob's Burgers season 14 finale. This thing is claiming to have been on for 14 years now. Longtime listeners know what I'm going to ask here, but if you're new, let me just focus for a second. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. I'm very serious here. 2 questions. 1, have you ever seen Bob's Burgers? Like, have you ever actually seen the show? I get that it exists in popular culture. For example, an article in Vulture, where there are t-shirts, where there are merch, where people talk about this show. I get it. But have you ever actually seen it? I know you would watch football, and Joe Buck would say, after the game, an all-new episode of Bob's Burgers. And then they would put this really long post-game show there, during which you would switch over to NBC and watch Sunday Night Football. Did Bob's Burgers actually air? Did you watch it? You didn't watch it. You watched more football. Was there a promo? Sure, there was a promo. Is there artwork? Sure, there's artwork. But have you ever actually seen Bob's Burgers? You haven't. Now, here's what's really weird. Have you ever met anyone who has seen Bob's Burgers? Has anyone ever come up to you and said, did you see Bob's Burgers recently? Did you watch it last night? Man, I love Bob's Burgers. I haven't met anyone. And this thing has supposedly been on for 14 seasons across, like, how many years? Bob's Burgers supposedly debuted January 9th, 2011. You ever seen it? No. You ever met anyone? No. Now, I'm not going to read this list. It's on Vulture. I shared it in the Facebook group at Daily Comedy News Podcast Group. But just because it's an article doesn't mean it exists. I refer you to this article that I'm on right now, list of Inspector Spacetime episodes. In case you're not familiar with Inspector Spacetime, it's the very popular British science fiction show that's been on the air for over 50 years. Created by Sir Anthony Bonham Peace in 1962, the show follows the adventures of a mysterious being only known as the Inspector, a time and space-traveling alien. The show had low production values, and the first few seasons were broadcast in black and white, despite color being available. A succession of actors and one actress have portrayed an incarnation of the lead character. Each actor wore a variation of the traditional uniform of the inspector, a trench coat, an ascot, and a hat, typically a bowler hat. There's an episode list. For example, Season 1, A Timeless Man, The Blorgons, The Trip of Ruin, Ferdinand Magellan, The Gloom of Aquinas, The Incas, The Radar Men, Reign of the Nightmare. I can read episode titles for 50 years. Season 27, The Ninth Inspector took over. If you're not familiar with Inspector Spacetime, it's a made-up bit from Community. And I just read you a ton of episodes, so don't tell me Bob's Burgers exists. It is a hoax. 2 questions. Have you ever seen Bob's Burgers? No. Have you ever met anyone who has seen Bob's Burgers? That answer is also no. And I have just killed off a slow news day. That's your comedy news. See you tomorrow.